Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear us and see us. If you are here for the Person-Centered Planning, Creating a Plan that Evolves Over Time webinar from MFOFC, you're in the right place. Thank you so much for taking time today to join us. We've experienced a little bit of a glitch so far, just kind of with people not being able to stay in the meeting or something, or kind of, so bear with us. We are kind of starting a couple of minutes behind schedule, but I hope you can hear and see us, and let us know if you cannot hear or see me. Use the chat box to let us know. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can see the chat box and see if everybody, can everybody just type yes if you can hear and see me, please? Great. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. Because I was just getting a little concerned because I know Susan, our guest, cannot see me, although she can hear me. So I appreciate you guys letting me know that. Thank you so much for making time today. Welcome to this webinar on person-centered planning, creating a plan that evolves over time, and for bearing with us with the starting trouble a little bit. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I hope your families are staying safe and healthy at this time. And I definitely appreciate you making time to spend this 1 hour with us. Just real quickly, please mute yourselves, as you know, so that we can hear the guest clearly without disruption. We are planning about 40 minutes for the conversation with Susan, and then followed with for about 10-15 minutes for Q&A if you have questions. Before we get started, I do want to share my screen real quick and let you know about some upcoming webinars. We are wrapping up the series, so we are basically we have 2 webinars coming up, which is on June, hold on 1 second. Okay, so we have 2 webinars coming up next month, and we will be wrapping up the series on housing next month, which has been a year-long look at person-centered planning and innovative approaches in person-centered planning. So next month we have guest speaker Susan Tachow. She's the CEO of Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation. She will talk about how she created a model of independent living for her son, who is sharing a home with 2 other people, and it's an affordable, accessible model, and it's called HomeWorks, and it uses a mini board. So she's going to talk about that, and she's going to talk about other financial tools that you can leverage for creating affordable, accessible homes that enable independent living for your child. So that's June 18th at 1 p.m. On June 24th, we will wrap up the series with a parent panel discussion. We've had 2 parents actually be guests earlier in the series, Laurel Peltier and Sandy Heller from MFOFC, and they will be joined by another parent from Pennsylvania, Kathy Brill, who have all designed person-centered living arrangements for their adult children, and they are going to share with us lessons they've learned from COVID's impact on their planning and arrangements, and how that may have changed anything and what they want to share. So looking forward to that, and that's on June 24th at 2 p.m. So with that said, I want to welcome Susan today. She is Susan Yuan. Is the Professor Emerita and consultant at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at the University of Vermont. She is mom to 46-year-old Andreas, who has Angelman Syndrome, who we will learn more about today. She's also the founder of Yuan and Associates and is the past president of the Association for Successful Parenting. Dr. Yuan brings extensive experience in working with parents with disabilities who are parenting children with disabilities and also parents who have children without disabilities. So welcome, Susan, and thank you so much for making time for us today. And let's get started. Our webinar today is about lessons that you've learned from your family's journey in finding a support provider for your son, Andreas, and how his relationship with his support provider has evolved over time, and what are the takeaways from that. So let's start by you telling us about Andreas and giving us a little bit of background on the kind of person he is, his strengths, challenges, what he's doing currently.
All right. And I'm going to try to limit the amount of time that I talk on this because I could talk forever on this, as most parents know. I'd like to start by showing you his graduation picture. And you can tell me if you can see it. Is that good?
Yes, yes. You can raise it a little bit. Yep. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. That was in 1997. He's been out of school for quite a long time, but it's quite easy for me to still remember back to that time when we were in the process of trying to figure out, where we went from there. Andreas has Angelman Syndrome, as you notice, as you said, and what that means is that his personality characteristics are that he is extremely friendly and outgoing. Socialization is a real need for him. He really has to relate to people. He loves people. He is very forgiving, more so than his mother. He likes to be in the midst of large groups of people. He likes to relate to many people. He likes music and dancing, but he also requires some degree of support 24 hours a day. That people with Angelman syndrome have got some fairly significant sleep problems that have fortunately gotten better as he's gotten older. But they also can be quite impulsive. They want to do something that catches their attention. So it's necessary for someone to be relatively alert all the time, or at least aware. It doesn't mean that, for instance, he can't be in another room and doing things without people checking on him, but people just have to be sort of alert and aware all the time. And that's something that's important in relation to a direct support provider. Andreas, so he takes a fairly high level of support. He's independent at some things, but he still needs assistance in a lot of his personal care.
Okay.
So it's in thinking about the right direct support provider, we had to think both of someone who could do that personal care and who would be willing to do that personal care, but at the same time, someone who would be able to lead him into the world of social interaction. And those are really two different skills, and to get them in one person can be a challenge. Very often, some of your personal care attendant people are very good at doing that, but they're not interested in the other part of making an enriched life. So it presented a challenge.
Is he employed right now?
No, when Andreas was in school, we concentrated very hard on getting him ready for employment. And when he graduated, we had 4 part-time jobs in place. And over the course of his first year out of school, he lost every one of those jobs. And he lost it because we were going through incredible turnover for the direct support providers.
Hmm.
I'll be going into some of that. It was quite a difficult period of time. And we didn't have enough continuity
Hmm.
in the workers to be able to support him in a job.
Okay.
So, and then he never has since become employed. He's done some volunteer work, but he's never had a steady job at all because we put all the energy into the direct support provider and his home placement.
Okay. So what does his life living arrangement look like right now as of, and I know we're not talking COVID specific, but,
Right,
just a typical arrangement. Tell us about that.
right. Technically, on paper, his direct support provider, Jason, is supposed to have responsibility 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, with a moderate respite budget.
Okay.
Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't work for Andreas, it doesn't work for us, and it doesn't work for Jason. That what's evolved is a shared arrangement where Jason knows that it's his responsibility.
And Jason is the support provider.
The support provider. But anytime that I ask him that I want him to have Andreas overnight, whether for 1 or 2 nights or whether for a long stretch, that's his responsibility, and he knows it and accepts it. But in reality, what it is, it's come down to more of a shared responsibility where, for instance, we usually have Andreas all weekend, including the overnights. Jason usually has Andreas every day other than weekends, and then we divide up the overnights. And that's all very flexible according to what works in terms of all of our lives.
Okay.
For instance, when Jason had children and they were being born, obviously I took more responsibility on for Andreas during the time that the babies were being born, things like that.
Okay. And we'll get to that a little bit more
Yes.
Tell us then, you mentioned Jason. So tell us about that. And I know you didn't come to Jason easily, as you indicated. So tell us about that process and the duration it took and how you ended up finding him, because there's a lot of valuable learning in that process.
Right. That process went on actually for probably at least 5 years, maybe more than that. And it was 5 years that no parent particularly wants to go through because it was one direct support provider after another. It was very hard to get stability. We had a couple of situations where we actually got stability and then the worker got involved with drugs. There was a lot of upheaval during that period of time. And it was hard on Andreas, but it was also hard on us because we couldn't really plan for the future. And we couldn't even particularly make a well-structured life for Andreas when there was so much change going on.
And was this when Andreas was really young?
No, this was as we were going into the transition period.
Okay.
And for a period of time, I decided that I'd been served by one agency that wasn't really sending good workers and wasn't really doing a particularly good job. So I decided that I would do self-management for a period of time. And I did that, but I discovered after I did it for quite a while that it wasn't compatible with my lifestyle because I was doing quite a bit of travel for my work. And there was one time that I was at a conference in Chicago and his direct support worker fell through and I was on the phone trying to find direct support workers. I was on the phone from the conference hotel. And at that point I decided, self-management can be very good for people who are right there and who are able to do it, but this is not a good idea for me. And at that point, we began looking around for another agency and found a very good agency.
So tell us about that agency.
That agency is an agency whose values very closely align with ours. They are very, very strong on relationships. For instance, their home providers last for decades. There's very, very little turnover.
Okay.
And it's partly because there's a great deal of flexibility, but it's also because the agency itself, from the very beginning, has had a board of directors that is completely parents and people with disabilities themselves. And that was by choice of the agency. It's part of their philosophy.
And this is in Vermont where you're based.
In Vermont, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's called Upper Valley Services, and it really is an excellent agency. Sometimes it appears to be a little chaotic because there's so much flexibility, but their attempts are consistently to be responsive to the needs and wishes of the people and the families.
And I actually see a question here. It's where is Andreas living while having Jason?
Andreas's living is in a town which is next door to the town that we live in. And Jason actually built a new house with a room for Andreas in it. And as I say, he divides his time between our house and Jason's house. But it's primarily, Jason's house is at least what's listed as Andreas' residence.
Okay. So back to the journey, right? So you mentioned yes. There were other, like 5 of them, the direct support providers who you originally hired and didn't last. So what was the reason? Was it just a lack of, I mean, you mentioned drugs. Any
that
other?
Was one, yeah.
Yeah.
Others, it was just people that, one thing I've discovered about direct support providers is that it's extremely important to find the right match between the interests and the personality of the direct support provider and the interests and personality of the person that they're supporting. And he had workers who would take Andreas into their lives, doing their activities, but really didn't care about doing the things that he was interested in. And that was where some of the difficulty came in trying to find people that, they would take care of him all right, but they really weren't interested in figuring out what it was that he wanted to do. He was safe. Well, actually, with the woman who was finally got hooked on drugs, he was always safe with her because she always prioritized his safety. But it became too difficult a situation and it couldn't work.
Okay, so then you didn't get to how you ended up finding Jason.
Yeah, I went to the agency and I said, I'm at my wit's end. We have to find someone who is the right match for Andreas. And the next day, they sent Jason over to meet Andreas, and he walked in and he saw Andreas, and Andreas saw him and went over and hugged him, and they've been together ever since, and that was 15 years ago.
So it was like an instant connection.
Yeah, it was just an instant connection.
I mean, it sounds like they recognized each other or connected with each other in some way, but how did you know?
I knew first of all, as soon as I saw the connection. But the fact that Jason was willing to just completely let Andreas come over and hug him instantly. Some people either want to set up proper behavior. Some people are uncomfortable with that. Jason just went with it, that he just basically responded to Andreas rather than trying to come in and impose a relationship on Andreas.
Now you've mentioned, so what were Jason's qualifications for this job?
Jason came to this job with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. And that pleased me. Now that may sound strange, but let me tell you why. There had been people that had worked with Andreas who had had a lot of training in behavior modification.
Mm.
And they always wanted to shape Andreas's behavior. And with Andreas, that almost always results in his getting more and more stubborn. That Andreas has almost no behavioral challenges, but you can create them if you try to get him to do what it is that you want him to do.
Mm.
So I wasn't looking for someone who had that kind of training.
Mm.
What I was looking for, and what Jason brought, was someone with, first of all, an outgoing personality, someone who could get beyond himself and could see Andreas for an important person, someone who had a great deal of common sense,
Mm.
just plain old ordinary common sense, and someone who had a degree of maturity. Actually, Jason is only a year older than Andreas, but he has a degree of maturity that enabled him to step into a big brother role with Andreas,
Mm.
which I think was exactly what I was looking for. Andreas has had many women, many second mothers, many big sisters, but this was someone who could be another young man along with him and could bring him into that part of life.
Mm. Like a peer almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was what I can offer Andreas is love. He's been with us from the time he was born, and Andreas and I have a very, very close relationship. But I'm not going to take him to concerts. I'm not going to take him to nightclubs. I'm not going to take him out to spring break in Florida. I'm not going to take him to Red Sox games. These are all things that Jason has done with him,
Mm.
because Jason's interests in life are quite closely aligned with Andreas's.
Mm.
That Jason had a part-time job for most of his time working with Andreas. He's also moonlighted as a bouncer for the nightclub in town. And Andreas loves concerts. So all the bands have gotten to know Andreas, all the concert goers have gotten to know Andreas, that he's given Andreas a part of life that I can't give him.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give him classical music, I can give him uh, plenty of family time, but I can't give him that kind of enrichment that Jason could give him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that I was extremely pleased about. And I have to say, I didn't do anything to find Jason.
Mm.
There's an element of luck in here
Yes. Yes.
that you can't do anything about.
But so then what should parents, I mean, luck doesn't necessarily play a role with everybody, right?
Right.
So what would the takeaway be for a parent who is like in a situation where he or she is looking for a direct support provider? And we know it's a very challenging time in many ways, especially to find somebody like that.
Yeah, just finding bodies is hard right now.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that. Partly because we can't find any respite providers for Jason right now.
Mm.
I'm the entire source of respite for the relationship.
Mm.
But I think the important thing, and that goes to the person-centered planning, it's knowing your child's personality, which obviously parents do. Parents know their child's personality, but knowing their interests, knowing the environments that they enjoy. Now, Andreas really likes those social environments. Another person might want a quieter lifestyle.
Mm.
But once you really know what it is that makes your son or daughter happy, then you could look for the person who matches that.
Mm. And it may not be, from your story, it may not be somebody with the qualifications, like who's like professionally trained.
Right. That all the training for Jason was on the job.
Mm.
That it was partly that I spent a long time talking with him. We had a couple of trips together where Andreas and Jason and I were presenting at a conference. and
Mm.
we had a lot of time to talk about what was important in Andreas's life.
Mm.
It was just sharing a lot of those things, but it was also knowing from the beginning that there was a particular lifestyle that Jason had that would be a lifestyle that Andreas would enjoy.
Mm. Mm.
And
Were
that
there
was what I,
uh, sorry, were there any challenges in getting Jason to the point where he is, I mean, given that he was not trained, or is there anything that you'd like to mention?
Actually, it went the other way around
Mm.
because Jason had not been trained and he didn't even really know disability.
Mm.
He wasn't afraid of Andreas. Andreas, people with Angelman syndrome have seizure problems, and
Mm.
Andreas doesn't have seizures anymore, but he gets tremors occasionally. But Jason never was afraid to take him into any situation because he hadn't really built up a worry about how Andreas's disability would impact him. So instead, he treated him as just another person who was his age.
Mm.
Uh,
Interesting.
and, the things that he needed to learn, like what do you do when Andreas gets tremors? You
Mm.
give him half a pill of clonazepam and you put him in a place that he can sit stably for about half an hour. Things like that I could teach him.
Mm.
The other thing that's interesting, um, Andreas will always test a new provider. And I warned Jason at the beginning. I said, I don't know what he's going to do, but he will test you.
Mm.
And the very first day that Jason worked with him, I got a phone call in my office at 4:00 saying, Andreas is sitting down on the floor of the car park at the mall and won't get up. And the police are here. Can you come? So I did. And actually, the police had thought he was drunk.
Mm.
That's happened more than once. And I told Jason, I said, he won't do this more than once or twice. He just has to get it out of his system.
Mm.
And that was exactly true. And Jason laughed and said, okay, I'm good for it. And within a couple of times, he was past that. And there were no problems whatsoever after that.
Sounds like a great attitude too, right?
Right.
A can-do attitude.
Yeah, he wasn't scared away by
Yeah.
it.
Mm. Okay. So you mentioned, a big part of the thing was the story is the relationship has evolved over time, right? So tell us about that. How, Jason, how long has it been since he's known Jason?
It's been about 15 years now.
And he's now married. Like when they met, he was not. Now he has a family.
Right. The way that it was different at the beginning was that he was a bachelor, and
Hmm.
he was a very popular bachelor. And he very much enjoyed taking Andreas to the nightclub and to concerts because he said that Andreas was a babe magnet. That women would come over because they would see him with Andreas and they would think, oh, this is a good guy. And Jason got a good laugh out of the fact that a lot of the girlfriends that he met because they were attracted to his relationship with Andreas. So for probably the first 5 years of their time together, or maybe longer than that, it was really a bachelor's existence.
Hmm.
That they, as I said, Jason took him down because Andreas had never been to spring break in Florida when all the babes were down there. Jason took him down for 3 weeks in Florida at spring break. And he took him to, as I say, took him to Red Sox games regularly, took him to 3 nights of Pearl Jam concerts in Philadelphia, and they stayed in hotels.
Hmm.
And Andreas really had a very, very rich life.
Hmm.
And for a while, he and Jason had a small business as accessibility consultants for rock festivals.
Interesting.
Because they would go to rock festivals and they weren't accessible, so they would consult for the rock festival.
And how
So
did that go? How long did that last?
it lasted for a short time because Jason said, once you teach them how to do it, they don't need you anymore. But Andreas, as I say, had a very, very rich life for that period of time.
Mm,
And actually, he and Jason got the award for the best supportive relationship in the country from
nice.
Tash in Chicago.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And Jason was looking around for a wife.
Mm,
And uh, actually, a lot of the relationships broke up over Andreas
mm,
because they were attracted to Jason because of Andreas, but then they wanted him to quit working for Andreas and
mm.
just be there for him. And he broke up with at least 3 women because of that. And then he
Wow.
met someone that looked like it was going to be a very, very good relationship.
Mm.
And Jason got married, and Andreas was his best man in the wedding and refused to give up the ring. And my son-in-law had to go up and take the ring away from him and give it to Jason. But I think one of the things along the way was that Jason really became part of our family.
Yeah,
And
sounds like it.
yeah. And then after a couple of years, Jason had his first child. And that changed the nature of the relationship. Not so much a nature of the relationship, but the nature of their activities.
Mm.
Because Jason no longer was going to rock festivals so much, no longer was spending as much time in the nightclub,
Right.
even though he still did some work there. But he became more of a family man, which is appropriate.
Yes.
Uh, it also meant that because Jason's wife was working, and it was important for her to work because she provided the insurance for the family,
Mm-hmm.
Jason was also taking care of his baby for a short time, or, until the baby was past the toddler stage.
Mm-hmm.
So Andreas then went into the role, which he'd been in with other people before, of being around a baby. And he
Mm-hmm.
loved the baby, and the baby still loves him.
Mm-hmm.
He's now 4 years old. And then last year, Jason's wife had a second baby. And that really has changed the nature of Andreas's lifestyle to be a more settled lifestyle,
Mm.
because Jason's lifestyle is more settled.
So what does that look like for Andreas now? Because he spends so much time with Jason.
Right. Well, when things aren't being influenced by the virus, that's changed
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
But before
And
the
we'll get to
virus,
that. Yeah.
before the virus, uh, Jason finally decided, once they had 2 babies, that he couldn't both do care of the babies and take care of Andreas at the same time, because the needs of the babies were different from Andreas's needs.
Mm-hmm.
So he worked out an arrangement with his wife that they got childcare for the 2 little ones, and he would take Andreas into town. He would take him out for lunch. He would once again, for a while, they were posting flyers for one of the nightclubs for a part-time job, but it was still mostly socialization. But he would take him out a great deal more.
Mm.
Andreas likes horses. He loves animals, dogs. Jason has dogs. During their bachelor existence, they went camping a fair amount. They no longer camp, but
So,
that's more than evolution.
so a typical day looks like what in Jason's house?
It would be just that they would get up, they would have breakfast, they would be with the children, and then the children would go to daycare, and Jason would take Andreas out into the community.
Okay.
And sometimes they would have lunch with other people that are friends of Andreas's.
Mm.
Jason also, because he had such a wide circle of friends himself, Jason,
Mm-hmm.
once a week he used to have game night. And 4 or 5 of his friends would come over, and Andreas had a job during game night. Andreas would throw the dice for the game. And one time they would do, they would do different things. For instance, at one time on game night, they were doing a World War II game, and they decided to give Andreas his own army, and they all had to respond to whatever Andreas did with his army. So Jason was very creative at figuring out how to include him in the group of people. And one of his friends, actually, who performed the wedding, used to be a classmate of Andreas's. So the fact that they were so close in age really gave them a lot in common.
Now, Jason, this is Jason's full-time job, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so.
And he still can moonlight if it fits, if Andreas can be part of it.
Yes. So I guess that brings me to the obvious question, which is, again, somebody also asked it. How is Jason paid? Tell us, about the funding and how this whole, how is this made possible?
Yeah.
In terms of funding.
Yeah. This is a model that is quite common in our developmental service system. Some states refer to it as host homes. Some refer to it as, like a foster family. In ours, we used to call it developmental homes, and then we decided we didn't like that name. So we just call it supported living. But it's a model that is funded by Medicaid under the Medicaid waiver. And in order to get the most out of the money, our state has figured out how to set it up so that the person, the direct support provider or the home provider, is not an employee of the agency, but an independent contractor. So he contracts independently, and they have a payment that's called a difficulty of care payment, which is tax-free. It's a classification under Medicaid.
I see.
So they're able to pay a significantly higher salary by using that model.
Difficulty of care?
Yeah, difficulty of care payment.
Okay.
And I presume it's because Andreas is difficult to care for. But it provides a comfortable salary. For instance, Jason earns $54,000 a year tax-free. Now he has no insurance, and it works for them because his wife has insurance. But that could be a problem for another family trying to do the same thing. It requires the kind of model that the home provider gets this entire amount and actually has a choice. If the home provider doesn't want to do everything, 24 hours a day, they can, and they also have a respite budget, but they can decide, for instance, to hire out a portion of that money for someone else to do part of the job. For instance, some of the homes hire someone to do employment, but that takes away from the overall salary for the home provider.
Right.
And because we want Jason to be in this for the longest possible time, and he's committed to be in it for as far into the future as he can see, we think it's extremely important to save as much of the budget for him as possible.
And what about like SSI, SSDI?
Yeah. Andreas gets SSDI because I'm old now. It shifts when the parent retires, it shifts to SSDI from SSI. And because Andreas still spends a significant amount of time at home, like weekends and some overnights, we split the amount between us and Jason. And we prorate it. For instance, if he's been at Jason's house for half of the nights in the month, Jason gets half of the SSI, and we retain half of it. If he's been there for longer, for instance, if I go away for a trip, he can be there, say, as long as 3 weeks at a time, then Jason would get 3/4 of the SSI. And there are times, like at the beginning of COVID, when Jason only had him overnight 6 nights. but Jason is very comfortable with splitting that money, and that money is supposed to be for room and board.
And you mentioned when we spoke earlier, you also mentioned a trust fund, I think.
Yes, because none of us can ever know what's going to happen with Medicaid. We can hope that Medicaid will always be stable, and Andreas's needs will always put him into a fairly high category of need. But we set up a trust fund, and this was before ABLE accounts were a possibility.
And did we mention Andreas is 46?
Yeah, Andreas is 46.
Yeah.
And first we set up a trust and didn't put anything in it because we just wanted to have the structure there. And then as we began to get a little older and work toward retirement, and we're thinking about how, I have 2 other children and I have grandchildren, we came up with an arrangement where we put a certain amount into Andreas's trust fund and haven't taken anything out, but when we're no longer here, more will go into his trust fund, and it won't be used unless it's necessary. Right now, Medicaid and SSDI take care of all of his needs.
And that will continue after your time?
Yes, yes.
And the trust fund, who manages the trust fund?
Right now, I'm the trustee, but his 2 sisters will take over as the trustees when I'm not here to do it.
Okay.
And the biggest challenge with them is that they want to put all of their inheritance into taking care of Andreas. And I say to them, that's not necessary. We've got it set up. You don't need to do that.
I guess sibling love, that's great.
Right.
And let's see. So tell us how Andreas is doing now under the new, the whatever craziness we are all living under with COVID. So tell us about that and how that has affected the, the living arrangement and just anything that might be helpful for parents.
Right. Andreas, it's hard on Andreas because he's so socially outgoing. And it means that basically he's got two sources of social relationship, Jason's family and our family. And in order to make that work so that Andreas gets enough variety is important to Andreas. We've done more of the back and forth since COVID. Remember, I said that at the very beginning of the COVID, Jason only had him overnight for 6 nights that month. That was because we were trying to work out an arrangement where Andreas got enough variety by just going back and forth between our lives. We both take him out for long rides. Andreas fortunately loves to ride in the car. And I have a Prius so that I have good gas mileage because he'll use it every weekend. We use Zoom a lot for his relations with his sisters, who both live on different continents. One lives in England and one lives in Hong Kong. So Andreas is much more used to seeing things on Zoom. And we try to provide for Andreas's need for concerts and music by YouTubes. Interestingly enough, Andreas loves opera, and Andreas's stepfather loves opera.
Nice.
So we watch a lot of opera at home. Perhaps more than I would always want to watch. But it's basically, under COVID, we've just tried to once again say, what's important for Andreas and how can we replace this as much as possible? And we can't replace it completely. But
yeah, a lot of it is also us going with the flow. I mean,
yes,
that's and taking one day at a time, applying to all of us, I guess. Okay, so we have about under 15 minutes, but real quickly, so what are your concerns and contingency plans for the long term? What's your thinking for after your time?
Right. Well, let me just say right now, we are being very, very good about staying home
Mm,
because I'm 76. Andreas's stepfather is 82.
mm,
Andreas's father is 86.
wow.
And his sisters are on different continents. So in order to maintain the safety, we're being very, very careful. And that's been important also. This ties back a little bit to what I was saying about COVID. That has meant that Jason's family
Mm,
has had to be equally as careful as we are.
yes.
Because if Andreas is going back and forth between the two households, uh, for a while I was really scared
Mm,
that, what would happen if
mm-hmm,
all by accident Andreas brought it home to me,
mm,
and then I probably wouldn't make it through because I've got heart failure and lung problems. So obviously that was a worry, and
mm,
it continues to be a worry. But the most important thing is to be sure. I haven't mentioned up till now, other than at the beginning, how important the agency is to us.
yes.
That I believe it's very important that the agency is there for when I'm not there,
Mm,
because I chose very carefully to get an agency that has the same value system as ours and
yes.
that knows Andreas extremely well, so that when something happens to me, they will have to step up and get more support for Jason,
Mm.
because Jason can't do it all by himself. That the reason it's worked so well for us is because we've shared a lot of the responsibility.
And you have a good relationship with the agency too, so that helps.
Yes, I'm on their board of directors,
Yeah,
and that was intentional.
right, right. But not everybody can get on the board of
No,
directors. So, I guess at the end of the day, it's really the relationship with the agency, whether you're
right.
on the board or not. Um, I guess we have, about 11 minutes. Anything else that you want to kind of, as we wrap up before we allow questions, more questions? Anything else you want to kind of, anything I didn't ask that you may want to talk about?
I think that the most important thing that I've learned over the years,
Hmm.
especially with Andreas and his personality, is that the most important thing to look for in anything is relationships.
Hmm.
That Jason genuinely loves Andreas and Andreas genuinely loves Jason.
Hmm.
So that relationship is there. But Andreas, people at the agency have good relationships with Andreas, that he's known. He's
Hmm.
known to many, many people. He's also known throughout the community. For instance, just an example, because he was fully included from late middle school on through high school, everyone in our small town knows him. And the town clerk, I don't even have to go in and ask for a ballot for Andreas because
Hmm.
he always votes by absentee ballot. She automatically sends me an absentee ballot for Andreas for
That's
every big
wonderful.
election.
That's great.
Yeah, he has so many relationships that he's built through inclusion, but also the relationships are the key to making everything work. And it
Hmm.
also means the relationship between me and Jason, that to a certain extent, I've become something as a second mother for Jason. And he's become more like a big brother for Andreas.
Hmm.
And it's, people say, well, you need natural relationships and paid relationships are different. No, sometimes paid relationships can become natural relationships too.
Mm. Now, yeah, I mean, obviously, you mentioned luck, right?
Yeah, true.
That looks like, sounds to me like luck is a big factor. You've ended up with Jason, and Jason, he's got married, and despite that, he's got a supportive wife and somebody who's able to continue this relationship because of that. Um, so I wonder what you would say to a parent who thinks, you know,
They
I
can't
mean,
find someone like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, all I can say is that um, There's probably a lot of turnover that you experience, because I certainly did. That period of time, uh, to be very honest, because Andreas requires care always, I once did a calculation of how
Mm.
many people have worked directly with Andreas over his life, and I came up to more than 2,000 people.
Wow. You mean like
through
including school
school through school
teachers and
teachers and
yeah.
every, yeah, that he has had so many people in his life, and
Mm.
probably half of those have been direct support providers at one time or another.
Mm.
That and you're going to find ones that are good, and that are good for a time, and then their life changes and they move on.
Mm.
It's just a question of always keeping in mind what is the best possible match for your son or daughter that you can get.
Mm.
And sometimes you can't get the very best, but you get the closest you can, and then
It's
you maintain it.
well, if you say 2000, obviously, that includes the schools and teachers and stuff, but I think what I'm hearing is tenacity and just kind of not giving up, and just a lot of hard work and patience on the part of the parent,
Yeah.
to kind of just keep looking and not give up. I know it's hard, as a parent, but I guess it rests on us to just keep looking.
Right. And the other thing is, if Andreas has ever indicated that he doesn't want to go with someone,
Mm.
I don't force him to,
Mm.
because he's got to be able to follow his own instincts. If he doesn't trust someone, I
Mm.
won't force him to go with them. And that's
Mm.
meant a couple of times I had to give up things that I had planned on doing,
Mm.
because it was a new worker and Andreas just categorically refused to go with him. And
Mm.
I thought, okay, Andreas knows something I don't know. So, but most of the time that wasn't the problem. It was just the fact of trying to find someone who would be consistent and would match what it was that Andreas wanted to do.
Mhm. It also sounds like trusting your instincts and your
Yes.
gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I guess one question is, how will you continue? How can you be sure you'll continue after your time?
Uh, Partly the agency,
Mm.
because they know our value system, and it matches the value system of the agency. So I know that when they know that Andreas needs someone else to enter his life, either if something happened to Jason,
Mm.
I would count on them to find someone else. And it might never be another Jason, but I would count on them to know what was important in Andreas's life and to find someone to fill that role.
But you're trusting the agency, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
and that is because you have a good relationship with the agency.
yes.
Yeah.
And, they have people that turn over too,
Mm.
but it's kind of it's making sure that you know the value system of the agency that you've chosen, and that it matches your value system.
Great. Any other questions, from the audience before we wrap up? We have about 5 more minutes, but um, if there's anything, feel free to ask, put it in the chat box, or just, it's just very few of us. You can even unmute yourself and ask before we wrap up. But this was super helpful, Susan. Um, Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions from Patty? We have two Patties on the call. I don't see anyone else. I think one person had to leave just a few minutes, and Sarah. If you don't have questions, I'm going to, chat the link for the post-webinar feedback survey. We would love to hear your feedback, and let us know if there's anything else that MFOFC can look into. I know we're wrapping up the series, but the work will continue as far as looking into person-centered planning and stuff like that. So I have somebody saying she's a wonderful mother. Her son is lucky. Thanks for sharing your journey.
Oh, thank you.
Totally agree. And so please take the survey, let us know, let MFOFC know if there's anything, there's a question that, what's your burning question about housing and living arrangements? Because this is something, I've been doing this since September, interviewing different people, and I've learned just Massachusetts, there's just still so much work and opportunity in terms of developing person-centered plans for people. And that mindset change is kind of slow to happen, and, thinking
And
along those lines.
just one thing that I would add, that because Andreas really needs that kind of 24-hour support, that was the kind of model that we went with for his housing, was the kind of a model that could provide that, that independent contracted model where everything would be put into the budget for the home provider. If someone is more independent and doesn't need that kind of 24-hour support, then it might be a different model that would come for housing that would, wouldn't necessarily put it all on one person,
right,
but could put more of the budget into employment or something like that.
Yes. But at the core is you're thinking about what Andreas wants, and that he is the center of the whole, the arrangement, right? He guides the how it looks and what happens.
Right. And if you don't follow what he wants, he will still take control of the situation.
Good for him. I say, good for him. I don't see any other questions. I appreciate everybody making time. Thank you so much, Patty and Sarah and the other person who was here, but I appreciate you all making time. And Susan, thank you so much. This was a pleasure to get to know you and meet you and share this conversation with you. So I appreciate it. You certainly spending time with us and, taking time to answer all of my questions as we prep for this. So I appreciate it. And good luck to you and Andreas, and, best wishes, and stay safe, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.